I have it written down in my journal of a school massacre that occurred in the United States. And it was so shocking what I saw that that morning I spent more than an hour, I want to say hours, in prayer because I wanted to sound an alarm in the spiritual realm that would prevent this massacre from occurring. And then I immediately, as soon as I opened my eyes, I believe it was on March 8th, March 8th or March 9th. It was on March 7th. So I'm going to put my book away because now I'm driving. But I dreamed that on March 7th that there was a school massacre, and it happened in an elementary school, and it was in America. And I remember seeing the school, and I remember there was a classroom. Two classrooms were impacted by it. One had lesser students, one had about 10 students in it, and the other one had about 36 students in it. And when the school, it was 2 to 3 white males, and when they came into the school and they identified these two classrooms were their entry point, they had a decision of which classroom they were going to massacre. They were going to go with the larger classroom. And so they had these machine guns, and they massacred the entire classroom. And I remember one of the teachers was involved. She was a young Caucasian woman. She involved, and she was handing the students over based on the one she liked and she didn't like to be killed. I believe their uniform or their school color was red. And I do believe that's symbolic of an affiliation, that the student, it was representative of an affiliation. It was not actually the color red, but that was a symbol in the dream. I also remember that seeing the blood, seeing the violence, and I remember seeing the parents outside of the school, laid on their belly like they're in combat, dragging themselves on their bellies by their elbows, armed with weapons above their heads as they crawled behind the school one by one, going in to rescue their own children. And I remember the terror on their faces because there was no police around. They were going on their own, policing their own school, going to get their children out of the school one by one. And I saw the relief on their face when they came out with their child in their arms, running for their lives. I remember there was one man who was in the back of the line waiting his turn to go and get his children because they didn't know if the shooters were still in the school. And so they were, I'm trying not to look at the camera because I want to look at the road, but they were waiting one by one. And so he was in the back of the line, and I remember the anticipation that was building up in him because he wanted to go in, but he was terrified to go in because they believed this school shooting was still active. And I just remember the scream that came out of him. It was a scream of terror, but then he was pulling all of his courage together so that he could run in, and then he ran in screaming and came out with his child. And I remember that he was speaking Spanish as he was crying out. Then I remember leaving the school and realizing that the active shooting was no longer active. The shooters had already plotted an escape and were already gone. But the police could not find them, had no leads on where they were. But I could see in the dream where they were. They were in some sort of big public space where there's like a marketplace, like a outdoor mall, like a bus station, train station type place where there's people moving about because the police were looking for them via like infrared technology or satellites where you can see body movement. And they were looking for people that were running, but they weren't running because they had already plotted and planned what they were going to do. It was premeditated and they already knew their way of escape. So I remember hearing the police don't know where they are, or the police don't have any suspects. And I remember the dream looking to the person that said it and said, the police don't know where they are? In shock, because it was such a violent act that shook the whole area, shook the whole country with fear that they would do it again. I remember walking in the dark away from the school home. All the people were trying to go home, but they were afraid to just walk in the open field because they believed there might be snipers who were planted in the open fields that would shoot the people that were walking. And I was walking amongst them, and I looked down and I said, oh no, I have on a red shirt. And right there in the dark, I took my red shirt off and threw it down. And I knew that that meant that they were targeting anyone that had on the color red. Now that could be a political affiliation, or that could mean something else. But then the dream switches to, it felt like the next day, the next week, in that same town. I was inside of a marketplace, not a big grocery store, but like a smaller convenience store, somewhere where you could buy food, and you could buy toys, you know, just some sort of store. And I'm standing there in the dream. I'm not visible, but I can see the clerk at the counter. And then I see a man walk in with a weapon. He's armed. It's not concealed, but he's not actually an attacker. He's walking into the store to do his shopping with an unconcealed weapon that's loaded and armed in his hand. And then I remember the cashier getting on her walkie-talkie and making an alert that there was an armed man walking into the store. So she reached under her register and she pulled out her weapon. And I believe that was revealing that this will be the times that there will be armed employees that will have permission to be armed at the register, because people will be afraid of attacks in the stores, so that they will do their shopping in the stores armed. So the cashiers will then also need to be armed. And then the man came to the register to check out. He had his gun in his hand. He was not coming to attack anyone. He was shopping this way. And she said, sir, you are not allowed to have your weapon open like that in the store. And he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And she had her weapon in her hand as well. It was like we were self-policing. Like everyone was carrying their own weapons to police because they weren't going to go to work if they didn't feel safe. So this was now allowed. There was no security guard to address him. The cashier just simply said, put your weapon away, while she was armed, basically saying, if you don't, you will be shot. And then he put his weapon away. And I just saw that dream, and I woke up as if I had lived and seen a very violent, a very bloody, a very world-shaking school massacre. And so I woke up that morning. The very first thing I did, because I was going to have to get out of bed to prepare my children to go to school, and I know that it was in the elementary school, and my children go to elementary school, so I was not going to send them to school after that dream without going into prayer. And the first thing I did was I posted a prayer alert. Everybody pray now. And then I began to go into prayer. I prayed the whole way to school. I prayed when I dropped them off. I prayed after I dropped them off. I prayed on my way to the gym. I prayed in the gym. I prayed until I felt it break. And then I wrote the dream down when I was in the gym. The following week, on that Monday, there was a school shooting in my city. The next day, I don't know the city, but I know it's in the United States, there was another school shooting. It may have been 2 to 3 school shootings since I've had that dream. But I know that I set off an alarm in the spirit because I felt it break. And I'm thankful that now all of the schools and all of the police departments are on high alert, because I prayed for the FBI to be alerted, for the gun shops to be alerted, for detectives to be alerted, for police stations to be alerted of this planned attack that was in motion. So now I believe, because of these individual, as bad as they are and terrible as they are, I believe they have put the nation on alert so that this planned attack can be prevented. If you see this video, just pray for our schools, pray for prayer to happen in the schools, pray for God to send in his secret agents into the schools by way of teachers. Pray for political hatred. Stop spreading political division, because as much as you might disagree with someone's political affiliation doesn't give you a right to hate them. And any words that you speak could be adding fuel to the fire that could cause these type of attacks to occur. So just be mindful of the things that you speak and say in this season, and just pray, because prayer is more powerful than trying to convince somebody to agree with your opinion.